I still can't believe I fell for it. After years of being the family outcast, I actually thought they wanted to include me again. Stupid, right? But when that fancy digital invitation hit my email last month with all the resort details and my name actually on it for once, I let myself hope. Man, hope is a dangerous thing. Some background. I'm the oldest of three siblings. My brother Terry, 53, and sister Cheryl, 49, both went into finance and business stuff while I chose a different path. I was always the creative one. Started a small custom furniture business back in the 90s that did okay but never made me rich. Not like Terry with his investment firm or Cheryl with her real estate empire. They've always looked down on me for not being ambitious enough. After my divorce about 7 years ago, things got worse. My ex got half of everything, fair enough, and I had to downsize my workshop. Business slowed during the recession, and I've been living pretty modestly ever since. Not poor or anything, just normal middle class, which in my family might as well be homeless LOL. My kids are grown now, son 28, daughter 25, and they're kind of distant too, influenced by their mom and my successful siblings. For the past few years, I've been excluded from most family events. Christmas invites stopped. Birthday calls became birthday texts became nothing. I'd see photos on Instagram of family gatherings I wasn't invited to. Beach houses, ski trips, fancy restaurants. Always with excuses like, oh, we thought you'd be busy, or it was last minute, or we figured you couldn't afford it. As if they couldn't just invite me and let me decide. So when I got that email invitation to the Coleman family reunion at this fancy resort in the mountains, complete with room reservation confirmation and everything, I was actually touched. The email said something about healing old wounds and bringing everyone together again. I honestly thought maybe someone, probably my mom before she passed last year, had talked some sense into them. I spent almost 2 weeks getting ready, got my one good suit dry cleaned, bought a new tie, even got a haircut and trimmed my beard nicely, packed my best casual clothes for the 3-day weekend. I was nervous, but also excited to reconnect, maybe repair some relationships, especially with my kids who would be there. The resort was a 6-hour drive from my place. 6 hours of building up hope and rehearsing what I'd say to everyone. I kept thinking maybe this was Terry extending an olive branch since he was always the unofficial head of the family after Dad died. I actually practiced conversations in my head about how I'd be polite and not bring up old grievances. I pulled up to this massive resort. We're talking 5 stars, valet parking, the works. I couldn't afford this place in a million years. When I gave my name to the valet guy, he checked something on his tablet and looked confused. He called over a manager. That's when things started going sideways. The manager checked my name and told me there was no reservation for me. I showed him the confirmation email on my phone. He said that confirmation number wasn't in their system. I was standing there with my pathetic overnight bag when I spotted Terry walking out the main entrance in a freaking tuxedo. I called out to him, relieved to see a familiar face who could clear this up. The look on his face when he saw me, I'll never forget it. First shock, then this slow smile that wasn't friendly at all. He started laughing. He walked over and asked what the hell I was doing there. I told him about the invitation. That's when Cheryl came out with her phone already recording, and my nephew Austin, Terry's son, right behind her. They were all dressed for some kind of formal event. Terry told me there was no family reunion. There never was. The invitation was fake. They sent it just to see if I was desperate enough to show up. Cheryl was recording the whole thing, laughing about my pathetic overnight bag and asking if I had ironed my one good shirt for the occasion. Austin was nearly doubled over, saying he couldn't believe Uncle Loser actually fell for it, and asking if I'd told my divorced men's support group I had plans this weekend. Terry's wife Joan came out and joined in. She's always been the worst, looking down her nose at me since day one. She said something about how sad it was that a man my age would be so desperate for family connection that I'd drive 6 hours on a fake invitation. She actually suggested I get therapy. Then Terry got serious for a minute. Started listing off all my failures. My age, my failed marriage, my modest income, how my kids barely acknowledge me. Said I was living off Social Security. Not even true, I still work. The whole time, Cheryl kept filming and Austin kept laughing. The worst part? I saw my daughter Juliet inside, watching through the window. She didn't come out, didn't say anything, just watched. The security guy was standing there awkwardly the whole time. Eventually, Terry handed me a resort brochure and said, "Here's what successful people do. And here's reality. You're banned from all family events. Forever." Then he told the security guy not to let me in under any circumstances. As they all turned to walk back inside to whatever fancy event they were having, I just stood there with my stupid overnight bag and that damn brochure in my hand. I should have yelled, should have pushed back, should have done something, but I was too shocked. All I managed to say was, "You'll regret this. I promise you'll all regret this." Terry laughed again and said something like, "What are you gonna do?" Then they all went inside, still laughing. I drove back home in a daze. 6 hours of pure rage and humiliation. I had to pull over twice because I was shaking too much to drive. Called off work the next day. Couldn't eat. Couldn't sleep. But now I'm thinking clearly. See, what Terry doesn't know, what none of them know, is that I know things. Things about Terry's business practices. Things about where some of his money really comes from. Things I've kept quiet about for years because, despite everything, he's still my brother. I've spent the last week making plans. I'm not just going to let this go. They humiliated me for fun, filmed it, laughed at me, made me drive 12 hours round trip for a sick joke. I've already made some calls to people who might be interested in what I know. Everything legal, of course. I'm not going to jail over this, but when I'm done, Terry won't be laughing anymore. None of them will. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. I'm not some pushover they can mock and discard. They have no idea what's coming. Update 1. I honestly didn't expect so much support, and it means a lot. Many of you asked for more details about the family situation and why my brother and sister would do something so cruel. Well, buckle up because there's a lot more to this story than I initially shared. So I've spent the past 2 weeks digging through old files, making phone calls, and basically piecing together exactly how my perfect little brother Terry became such an entitled asshole. It goes way back, but the core of it started about 20 years ago. Our dad was always kind of a hard ass. Former military. Expected a lot from all of us. He started a small construction business in the 70s that did pretty well. Nothing huge, but comfortable. When I decided to go into furniture making instead of joining the family business, Dad was disappointed, to put it mildly. But it was my life, you know? I wanted to create things with my hands, not manage crews and bid on contracts. Terry, on the other hand, was always Dad's golden boy. He went to business school, which Dad paid for, then came back and worked his way up in the family business. When Dad retired in 2003, Terry took over. That's when things got interesting. Within 3 years, Terry had sold the entire business to a developer for serious cash. Dad was pissed. This was his life's work, not just some asset to flip. There was this huge family blowout at Thanksgiving 2006 where Dad called Terry a sellout, and Terry basically told Dad he was stuck in the past and didn't understand modern business. I tried to stay neutral, which in retrospect was probably a mistake. After the sale, Terry started his investment firm with the proceeds. And somehow, despite having zero experience in that field, he started landing these massive clients, like suspiciously massive. Cheryl was working in real estate by then, and suddenly her business took off too. Their success seemed weirdly timed. Here's where it gets complicated. My old friend Colby worked for one of the companies Terry was advising. We'd grab beers sometimes, and around 2010, he started dropping hints that Terry's firm was doing some sketchy stuff, moving money between accounts in ways that didn't make sense, restructuring investments to hide losses, that sort of thing. I didn't want to believe it at first. He's still my brother, right? But then in 2012, I accidentally saw something I shouldn't have. Terry asked me to help him move some stuff from his home office, back when we were still on speaking terms. I found this folder with papers showing how he'd been using Dad's old business contacts to funnel money through some questionable offshore accounts. Not like full-on illegal maybe, but definitely in that gray area that makes accountants nervous and regulators suspicious. I confronted him about it. Big mistake. He got defensive as hell, said I didn't understand sophisticated financial strategies, and I was just jealous of his success. Then he started this whisper campaign in the family that I was bitter and envious. That's when the exclusion really ramped up, when my marriage fell apart in 2018, partly because of financial stress. Terry and Cheryl were zero help. Instead, they started this narrative with my kids that I was irresponsible with money, and that's why their mom and I split. They'd invite my kids to these lavish vacations, buy them expensive gifts, basically trying to buy their loyalty. And it worked, at least partly. My son barely talks to me anymore, so that's the background. Now, for what's happened since the resort incident. The day after I got back, I called Colby, who now works at a different firm, and asked if he'd be willing to talk about what he knows regarding Terry's business practices. He was hesitant at first, concerned about professional repercussions. But when I told him about the resort humiliation, something changed. Turns out Terry had screwed him over on some investments years ago too. We met for lunch last week at this little diner, halfway between our towns. Colby brought copies of some old documents. Nothing super explicit, but enough to raise serious questions. He also gave me names of 3 other people who'd had problems with Terry's investment advice. One of them lost almost their entire retirement fund. I've been systematically contacting these people, carefully, nothing in writing that could come back on me, just phone calls or in-person conversations. One guy, a former client named Rick, actually broke down crying when I mentioned Terry's name. Apparently, he lost over $200,000 on an investment Terry promised was completely safe. The picture that's emerging isn't pretty. Terry's not running a straight-up Ponzi scheme or anything that obvious, but he's definitely been misrepresenting investments, hiding fees, and possibly commingling funds in ways that would make regulators very interested. And the whole time, he's been living this luxury lifestyle and looking down on me for being unsuccessful. Meanwhile, I found out from my daughter Juliet why they set up that fake reunion. Apparently, after Mom's funeral last year, I mentioned to Juliet that I missed being included in family events. She told Terry this in passing, and he thought it would be funny to see if I was desperate enough to show up for a fake invitation. Juliet claims she didn't know about the plan until she arrived at the resort that day, which is why she stayed inside instead of participating. She texted me a half-assed apology last week, but hasn't responded to my replies. So here's my plan, and I've been very careful to make sure everything is legal. First, I've compiled a detailed timeline of Terry's business activities over the past 15 years, including names of clients who've had issues, dates of suspicious transactions, and patterns that don't add up. Second, I've had 2 confidential meetings with a financial advisor, paid in cash, no paper trail, to understand exactly what regulations Terry might be violating. I didn't use Terry's real name, just described the situations as hypotheticals. This guy's eyes got wider and wider as I laid it all out. Third, and this is where it gets good, I've made contact with 3 of Terry's current business partners. These are people who have millions invested with him. I haven't shared anything specific yet, just expressed some concerns and suggested they might want to look more closely at their investment structure. One of them already called me back asking for more details. The beauty of this approach is there's nothing illegal about sharing truthful information. I'm not making false claims or threats. I'm just making sure the right people start asking the right questions. Oh, and I've also anonymously reported some of Terry's more questionable practices to the relevant regulatory agency. No idea if they'll investigate, but even if they just send him a letter requesting information, it'll put him on edge. I know this might seem mild to some of you who suggested more dramatic revenge, but trust me, for someone like Terry whose entire identity and lifestyle is built on his business reputation, this is devastating. If even one major client pulls their money, others will follow. It's like watching dominoes getting set up. The first domino just fell yesterday. One of Terry's business partners, the one who called me back, texted to say he's reviewing his investment strategy after our conversation. He also mentioned he's having lunch with 2 other major investors next week. I'm not rushing this. Good revenge takes time. But I can already imagine Terry's face when his clients start asking uncomfortable questions he can't easily answer. My sister Cheryl might get caught in the crossfire since some of her real estate success came from connections through Terry's firm. But honestly, after she stood there filming my humiliation and laughing, she deserves whatever comes her way. Some of you asked if I'm worried about family relationships. Listen, they destroyed those relationships themselves. At the resort, they made it crystal clear what they think of me. I'm just making sure they face consequences for their actions and their years of financial shadiness. I'll update again when there are significant developments. For now, I'm focused on making more calls and carefully, methodically, pulling on threads that will eventually unravel Terry's carefully constructed world. It's been strangely therapeutic, actually. For years, I felt powerless against their money and influence. Now I realize I have the one thing they don't, the truth, and I'm finally ready to use it. Update 2. It's been about 6 weeks since my last update, and holy shit, you guys, watching my plan unfold has been the most satisfying thing I've experienced in years. Remember how Terry texted me wanting to talk about what happened at the resort? Well, I never responded to that text. Instead, I've been letting my actions do the talking. Quick recap for those just joining. My successful brother Terry and sister Cheryl lured me to a luxury resort with a fake family reunion invitation, then publicly humiliated me when I showed up with my overnight bag. They filmed it, laughed at me, called me a family disgrace. I promised revenge. In my last post, I explained how I'd been gathering evidence of Terry's questionable business practices and starting to make contact with his clients and partners. So here's what's happened since. First, I decided to meet with 3 more of Terry's business associates. These weren't casual meetings. I was strategic about who to approach. I focused on his newer investors, People who had the most to lose and would be most likely to panic if they heard things weren't on the up and up. I met each one separately at different local diners. Nothing suspicious, just casual coffees where conversation happened to turn toward investment strategies. With the first guy, this younger dude who inherited money from his grandparents, I just asked innocent questions about how he chose his investment firm. Then I mentioned I'd heard some concerning things about certain firms that use offshore accounts to mask losses. Didn't mention Terry by name. Didn't have to. The guy immediately got this worried look and started asking follow-up questions. I just shrugged and said some firms were really good at hiding red flags. The second meeting was with an older couple who I knew had their retirement funds with Terry. This one was trickier. I didn't want to cause heart attacks or anything, so I approached it differently, asking if they had regular audits of their portfolio or if they just trusted their advisor. They seemed confused by the question, so I told them about a friend who discovered his advisor had been skimming for years. Again, never mentioned Terry directly, just planted seeds of doubt. The third person was actually a business owner who partners with Terry on some real estate deals. This guy was the most receptive. Apparently, he'd already been feeling uneasy about some inconsistent returns. I suggested he might want to have an independent financial advisor review the partnership structure. 2 days later, he texted to say he'd hired someone to do exactly that. All of this was just phase one, creating whispers, raising questions, nothing illegal or even directly accusatory. Just enough to make people start looking more closely at their statements and asking questions they hadn't thought to ask before. Phase 2 was more direct. Remember my friend Colby, who used to work with one of Terry's client companies? He introduced me to a guy named Marcus who actually works for a financial regulatory compliance firm, not as a whistleblower or anything official, just two guys grabbing beers. Marcus was very interested in some of the hypothetical situations I described. He asked detailed questions, taking notes on his phone. A week later, I heard through Colby that Marcus's firm had flagged Terry's company for a routine audit. Pure coincidence, I'm sure. Ha ha ha. Meanwhile, I've been monitoring the family situation through my daughter Juliet. After her half-assed apology text, I actually called her and we had our first real conversation in months. I didn't mention the revenge plan, obviously. I just told her how hurt I was by what happened at the resort. She seemed genuinely remorseful and admitted she felt caught in the middle. Terry and Cheryl have been helping her financially with her graduate school expenses. During our talk, she mentioned something interesting. Terry had canceled a family trip to Europe that was planned for next month. Apparently, he told everyone it was due to business obligations. But Juliet overheard him arguing with Joan about money. First sign that pressure might be building. Then last week, I noticed something on my nephew Austin's Instagram. He's always posting flashy crap. Cars, watches, trips. Typical rich kid stuff that Terry bankrolls. But suddenly the posts stopped. His last update showed him selling his fancy car because, and I quote, "time for something different." Yeah, sure, kid. Something different like, my dad can't afford my luxury lifestyle anymore. The real confirmation came 3 days ago. I was at the hardware store picking up supplies when I literally bumped carts with Joan, Terry's wife. Talk about awkward. She looked like she'd seen a ghost. I just smiled and asked how the family was doing. She mumbled something about fine and tried to hurry away. But I casually mentioned I'd heard Terry was having some business challenges. The look on her face. She snapped that their finances were perfectly fine and that Terry was just restructuring some investments. Then she abandoned her half-full cart and practically ran out of the store. Classic guilty reaction. That night is when things really escalated. Around 8 p.m., Terry himself showed up at my door. First time he's been to my place in literally years. He looked stressed, dress shirt wrinkled, no tie, that vein in his forehead popping out like it always does when he's upset. I invited him in because honestly, I wanted to see him squirm up close. My living room isn't fancy, but it was clean, and I had this weird sense of confidence knowing that his whole mansion lifestyle might be starting to crumble. He didn't even sit down, just stood there asking if I'd been talking to his clients. I played dumb at first, asking, why would I know any of his clients? He got more agitated, saying he'd heard from multiple people that someone matching my description had been asking questions and suggesting they look closer at their investments. I shrugged and said maybe his clients were just being more diligent these days. That's when he lost it a little bit. Demanded to know what game I was playing. I just looked him straight in the eye and asked why he thought I'd want to play any game with him after what happened at the resort. That stopped him cold. He actually looked uncomfortable for a second, then switched tactics. Started saying the resort thing was just a stupid joke that went too far. That Cheryl and Austin had taken it further than intended. Classic Terry. Never taking responsibility. I didn't argue or get angry. just asked calmly if he remembered what I said as they all walked away that day. He looked confused, so I reminded him. I said you'd regret it. All of you. The color drained from his face. He started threatening me, saying if I was interfering with his business, he'd make me sorry. I just smiled and told him I hadn't done anything illegal, just having conversations, sharing concerns, all perfectly legal. He left without resolving anything, slamming my front door so hard the frame rattled. As his car peeled out of my driveway, my phone dinged with a text from Cheryl. Whatever you're doing, you need to stop now. I didn't respond to her either. The next morning, I got an interesting email from one of Terry's biggest clients, a guy I'd spoken to weeks earlier. He wanted to meet again to continue our conversation. We set up lunch for tomorrow. Meanwhile, I've heard through mutual acquaintances that Terry's firm is suddenly restructuring client portfolios. Basically code for, we're trying to free up cash fast. One of his longtime employees quit last week. The rumor is Terry's company is facing a liquidity crunch because too many clients are pulling their money out simultaneously. Cheryl's feeling it too. Her real estate business depended heavily on clients Terry would send her way. Plus, I suspect he was backing some of her bigger deals. She's listed her vacation condo for sale, the one she was always bragging about on Facebook. The listing says, motivated seller in all caps. Gee, I wonder why. Yesterday, I got a call from my son. We barely talk, so this was unusual. Turns out Terry had reached out to him asking if I'd seemed different lately, or if I'd mentioned anything about Terry's business. My son was confused by the questions. I just told him Terry and I had a disagreement. Nothing for him to worry about. It bothers me that Terry tried to use my son to get information, but it's also another sign that he's getting desperate. The most satisfying development came this morning. My neighbor mentioned she saw Terry parked outside my house for almost an hour yesterday while I was out, just sitting there in his car, watching, waiting. He's definitely rattled. I'm being careful. Locked down all my social media, changed passwords on everything. Keeping documents in a secure location, not at my house. Terry's not stupid, and desperate people do desperate things. But everything I've done is perfectly legal. I'm just sharing truthful information and asking questions. This is just the beginning. Phase 3 starts next week when the regulatory audit of Terry's firm is scheduled to begin. I have no idea what they'll find, but based on what I know, it won't be pretty. I'll update again when there are major developments. For those who thought my revenge wasn't hardcore enough, trust me, watching someone's carefully constructed empire start to crumble because of their own shady actions is far more satisfying than any quick, dramatic gesture could ever be. Oh, and one more thing. Juliet called yesterday to say the family has canceled their annual holiday gathering at Terry's mansion. Apparently, they're scaling back this year. First time in 15 years they won't be hosting their extravagant party where they flaunt their wealth and success. Funny how things change, huh? Final update. Holy shit, you guys. The past month has been absolute insanity. When I started this revenge plan, I honestly wasn't sure how effective it would be. Turns out when you build your entire life on shaky financial practices and treating people like garbage, it doesn't take much to watch it all come crashing down. I woke up last Tuesday to my phone having an actual meltdown. 73 missed calls, 45 WhatsApp messages, 28 texts, and a bunch of emails, all from family members who 2 months ago were filming themselves mocking me at that resort. How the tables have turned, huh? So let me break down what happened since my last update. The regulatory audit of Terry's firm that I mentioned? It started 3 weeks ago. I didn't have any inside information about how it was going until I ran into Colby at the grocery store. He told me his friend Marcus, the compliance guy, couldn't share specifics but had mentioned that they'd found some concerns that required further investigation. In regulatory speak, that's basically code for, we found some shit. 2 days after that conversation, Terry's firm posted a notice on their website about temporarily pausing new investments while undergoing routine compliance updates. Nothing routine about it from what I've heard. According to a client I spoke with, they received a letter saying all accounts were being reviewed, and there might be delays in processing withdrawal requests. Meanwhile, Cheryl's real estate business started showing serious cracks. Not only did she sell her vacation condo, for about $70,000 less than market value according to Zillow, but 3 of her listings suddenly disappeared from real estate sites. My daughter Juliet mentioned that Cheryl had to let go of her assistant and was really stressed about money. Apparently, several deals fell through because the financing came from, surprise, partnerships with Terry's investment clients. Things really accelerated last Monday. I was working in my shop when I got a text from an unknown number. It was from Joan, Terry's wife, asking if we could clear the air and move forward as a family. I didn't respond. An hour later, Cheryl called. I let it go to voicemail. She left this long, rambling message about how the family had been going through some challenges and wanted to reconnect with everyone who's important to us. Still didn't respond. By evening, Terry himself called, twice, then texted asking me to please pick up. I finally texted back a single question mark. He immediately called again. This time, I answered. Terry sounded different. His voice tight, strained. None of that smug confidence from the resort. He asked if we could meet in person to discuss some family matters. I asked what family matters since I was supposedly banned from all family events forever. That comment was met with an uncomfortable silence. Then he admitted they were having some temporary financial difficulties and thought maybe I could help. I almost laughed out loud. Help? After what they did? I asked why he thought I'd want to help him after the resort incident. He actually tried to downplay it, said it was just a stupid joke that went too far, and that everyone felt really bad about it. Sure they did, now that they needed something from me. I agreed to meet him at a diner the next day, mostly because I wanted to see his face when I turned him down in person. When I arrived, Terry looked like hell. Unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, wearing a plain polo instead of his usual designer shirts. He'd ordered coffee but wasn't drinking it, just spinning the cup in circles. I sat down across from him and waited. He seemed unsure how to start. Finally, he launched into this convoluted explanation about how his firm was undergoing a standard regulatory review, but some misunderstandings about investment structures had caused temporary liquidity issues. He claimed it was all just paperwork problems that would be sorted out, but in the meantime, several major clients had panicked and pulled their investments, creating a cash flow crisis. I just nodded, letting him talk himself in circles. He eventually got to the point. He needed to borrow $200,000 to stabilize things until the audit was complete. Said he'd pay me back with interest once everything was sorted out. I asked why he'd come to me for money when he had so many wealthy friends and connections. He looked down at the table and mumbled something about current optics making it difficult to approach his usual network. Translation. Word had spread about the audit and no one would touch him with a 10-foot pole. Then I asked the question I really wanted answered. Why would the family disgrace who lives off Social Security, his words at the resort, have that kind of money anyway? His face actually flushed red. He stammered that he'd been emotional that day and said things he didn't mean. I let the silence stretch uncomfortably before saying no, just a simple, firm no. He started to argue, saying it was a solid investment opportunity, that family should help family. I cut him off mid-sentence and reminded him that he was the one who publicly declared I wasn't family anymore. His demeanor changed instantly. The desperate nice guy act vanished, replaced by anger. He hissed that I was enjoying this, that I must have had something to do with the timing of the audit and the client's withdrawing. I just shrugged and said maybe he should have thought about the consequences before sending fake invitations and humiliating people for fun. He leaned across the table and said if his business went under, it would hurt Cheryl too, and possibly even affect my kids since he'd been supporting Juliet's education. Classic Terry, trying to use my kids as leverage. I told him my relationship with my children was not his concern, and perhaps they'd be better off not depending on someone with such unstable finances anyway. He stood up so fast his chair fell backward, called me a vindictive asshole who was jealous of his success. Several people in the diner turned to stare. I remained seated, calm, and said that if his success was built on solid ground, he wouldn't be in this situation. Then I stood up, left $40 on the table for a $15 bill, and walked out. The next day is when my phone exploded with messages, not just from Terry and Cheryl, but from cousins, aunts, uncles, family members who hadn't spoken to me in years, all suddenly concerned about family unity and supporting each other through hard times. One cousin I haven't seen since Dad's funeral actually had the nerve to say she'd always considered us close and hoped I could help Terry through this misunderstanding. Cheryl's messages were the most desperate. Her real estate business was collapsing without Terry's client network. She'd had to pull her kids out of private school. Her husband was talking about selling their house. She actually wrote, I know we haven't always been kind to you, but we're still family. As if that magic word, family, would erase years of exclusion and mockery. My nephew Austin, who couldn't breathe from laughing at me at the resort, sent a message saying he'd been young and stupid and had just been following his dad's lead. He's 26, not 16, but whatever. He asked if I could talk to his dad about helping with his car payments since Terry had cut him off. Even my own son, who's been distant for years, called to ask what was going on with Uncle Terry and if the rumors about financial fraud were true. I told him I didn't know the details, just that Terry's firm was under regulatory review. He sounded worried. Turns out Terry had been managing some money for him too. I suggested he consult an independent financial advisor immediately. The situation came to a head 3 days ago. I was at home when a car pulled into my driveway. It was Terry, Cheryl, and Joan. I almost didn't answer the door, but decided to face them. They looked like they hadn't slept in days. They pushed past me into the living room without waiting for an invitation. Terry started by saying they knew I was behind everything. The audit, the client withdrawals, all of it. Cheryl added that I'd destroyed the family out of petty revenge. Joan just stood there with arms crossed, glaring. I didn't deny or confirm anything, just asked if they had proof of any wrongdoing on my part. Of course they didn't. All I'd done was have conversations and share concerns. Nothing illegal. I reminded them that if Terry's business was completely legitimate, no amount of rumors would cause this much damage. That's when Cheryl broke down. Through tears, she admitted they'd received notice that Terry's firm was being formally investigated for multiple regulatory violations. His accounts were frozen. They'd had to hire expensive lawyers. Their assets might be seized if certain violations were proven. Terry looked defeated in a way I'd never seen before. He slumped onto my couch without asking and finally admitted what I'd suspected for years. He'd been playing fast and loose with client funds, using new investments to cover shortfalls, hiding losses, and skimming from accounts he thought no one monitored closely. Not a full Ponzi scheme, but definitely in illegal territory. I asked why they'd come to tell me this. Terry looked up and said they needed my help, talking to some of the clients I'd turned against them. Claimed if I explained it was all a misunderstanding based on family drama, maybe they'd withdraw their complaints. Said we could work together to salvage the situation. I actually laughed out loud. The audacity was breathtaking. They still didn't get it. Even now, they saw me as a tool to be used, not a person they'd hurt. I asked if they remembered what they did at the resort. The fake invitation, the public humiliation, the recording. Cheryl tried to brush it off as ancient history and a stupid prank. I pulled out my phone, opened WhatsApp, and played the video Juliet had sent me. Yes, my own daughter had forwarded me the recording of my humiliation that Cheryl had shared in the family group chat. I let them watch themselves laughing at me, mocking my clothes, my divorce, my life. When it finished, I looked at each of them and said the exact words Terry had said to me at the resort. Here's what successful people do, and here's reality. I gestured around my modest but comfortable living room. I'm fine. My business is small but stable. I have no debt. I sleep well at night. You built an empire on lies and cruelty, and now it's collapsing. Terry lunged at me then, actually tried to grab me by the shirt. I stepped back and he stumbled forward. Joan pulled him away, hissing that assaulting me would only make things worse. Cheryl was crying harder now, asking why I couldn't just help family when they needed it. I showed them to the door and said I had exactly as much obligation to help them as they'd shown to include me in their lives over the past years. 0. As they were leaving, Terry turned back with this desperate look and asked what it would take. What could he do to make this right? I told him nothing. This wasn't a negotiation or a transaction. This was consequences. Something he'd managed to avoid his entire life until now. Since then, my phone continues to blow up daily. Family members I haven't heard from in a decade suddenly want to reconnect. Terry's firm has officially announced a temporary suspension of operations pending regulatory review. Cheryl's husband called to say they're selling their house and moving to a smaller place in a different school district. My daughter Juliet came to visit yesterday. First time in months. She was quiet at first, then asked if I was behind what was happening to Uncle Terry. I didn't directly answer, just asked what she thought about what they did to me at the resort. She admitted it was cruel and said she'd been too afraid of losing Terry and Cheryl's financial support to stand up to them. We had a long talk about family, money, and self-respect. It wasn't perfect, but it felt like a start. I told her I'd help with her education expenses if she needed it. Not as much as Terry could, but enough to get by. She hugged me before leaving. So that's where things stand. Terry's facing possible financial ruin and regulatory penalties. Cheryl's business is collapsing. The family's fancy lifestyle is crumbling. All because I decided not to stay silent anymore. Do I feel bad? Sometimes in small moments. They're still family. But then I remember them laughing as I stood there with my overnight bag, thinking I was finally being included again. I remember the years of exclusion and mockery. And I remember Terry's words, "You'll banned from all family events." Turns out, I didn't need their invitation anyway. I built my own life, smaller, simpler, but honest, and that's something Terry never understood.